Hello, everyone. This is Chris Zorich, and welcome to the Zorich Podcast. On today's show, we have a very special legend, a true Notre Dame legend, College Football Hall of Famer, Cotton Bowl Hall of Famer, and current board member of the National Football Foundation, Thom Gatewood. This is a huge honor for me, having the chance to kind of understand the historical perspective of what Notre Dame means to kind of college football, and knowing that it's individuals like yourself that have kind of paved the way for folks like me and obviously folks on the team currently. So thank you for all that you have given to the University of Notre Dame and all you have done for the university.
It feels great to be part of the legacy and the tradition of Notre Dame, of which you are a big part of yourself. You're downplaying yourself in the history that you have made and contributed to the university. But I tell you, when people say Notre Dame, they say Chris Zorich, they say Thom Gatewood, our names resonate and will resonate forever.
And understandingly so, as I got older, I realized how important that was. Of course, when you're there, you're 18, 21 years old, you really don't know what's going on. I didn't know the ramifications of how special of the opportunity I had when I was there until I got much, much older. But we will talk about that. You have an amazing, amazing story. And I want to start kind of growing up as a kid in Baltimore, kind of how you got involved in athletics. I know you kind of came from a big family. Right. Did everyone participate in athletics, or was it just kind of academics all the way for you guys?
My family was, pretty traditional. Mom and dad were the nucleus for the family. I had 3 brothers, 2 sisters. We grew up in a inner city setting, even though it was a mixed neighborhood. It was an integrated neighborhood at the time.
Okay.
When I moved, my dad was a farmer, grew up on the farm, had a 5th grade education. My mom was a high school graduate. No one bearing the name Gatewood in my generation had a college degree. So the initial drive point was get an education. Had nothing to do with sports. And if you think about farmers, for the most part, they're sun up to sundown, and it's all work, all business.
Right.
And it's nothing to do about extracurricular. So you keep your eyes on the prize, which is a diploma. So that was the motivation. As far as sports, I played sports, any kind of ball. For the most part, it was baseball. Baseball was going to be my thing. Willie Mays was my hero. Hank Aaron was my hero. Roberto Clemente, Brooks Robinson, those Al Kaline. He was from Baltimore. He played for Detroit. So baseball, I thought, was going to be maybe an answer, but I was only 7 or 8 years old. Had not discovered Little League Baseball. Didn't even know it existed until a neighbor kid, we became buddies, and he said, why don't you come out for the baseball team? You're really good at it, because we were just playing in the backyards and whatever, and I could play. And I said, okay. Well, I was just 12 years old, which means it's the last year of Little League ball. So that was my first real experience to organize sports. Football was 10th grade. Playing in the 10th grade was the first time for me to play organized football. Other than that, it was just throwing balls around and something like that. But had no idea about plays, patterns. So many players that I played with at Notre Dame and played against, they played in Pop Warner football and all kinds of organized ball, and they were well advanced in front of me.
Right.
When I got to high school, but I wound up playing on 3 straight championship teams when I was there. So I was fortunate. We had 4,000 boys, all male school, 600 guys came up for football. I was lucky enough to be fast and agile, and because of baseball, to get the eye of the head coach. The head coach, by the way, was George Young.
Right.
George Young being working with Don Shula with the Baltimore Colts for years. They won a couple of championships there. He followed Shula to Miami, and he got involved in the front office and drafted certain players. Then he wound up the general manager of the New York Giants and bringing in people that Phil Simms and guys who would eventually lead to 2 more championships. So I sort of stumbled into the football thing with sort of a football genius at the helm of a high school, who later on would be a legend in the program, steering my sort of beginning, my budding years, my formative years, giving me great fundamentals and helping me find myself. Because when I sat down in front of him in that line of 600 guys, he had a notebook with a name, and he said, "What position do you want to play?" And I said, "I have no clue, coach. Wherever you want me, wherever you need me, put me in there."
Right.
So being a receiver, I had no idea what was to come.
Well, you have a very interesting story on kind of how kind of sports played out in your family. You were kind of playing with out your parents knowing it. Can you
I was in
talk a little bit
disguise.
about that?
I was in disguise. I was off the radar because my mother was very, very fixated on the extracurricular activities. Probably would get in the way
Sure.
of studies.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no indicator of that because I had after school activities, but they weren't sports. And I was a straight A student my entire, academic career prior to coming to Notre Dame. So I gave her no reason to doubt my ability to work in the classroom.
Right.
And I did my chores and all that other stuff. But I had buddies, I had friends, and they were very anxious to have me join them in this game of football, and said, "Why don't you come out for football?" And I said, "Why would I do? I don't really, I'm not into football. When baseball comes in the spring, I'm going out for baseball. My parents know about that, and that's a safe sport. There's no injury issues and nothing. And as long as my mom sees those A's on that report card, I can do whatever I want to do. So I have my freedom and my independence." And so I proceeded to say that my friends are right. They said the deal is, after school, what are you going to be doing? We're going to be playing football. What will you be doing? Right. So, I decided, okay, I'll give it a try. Sort of doubting that I'm going to make this football squad because I don't really have a clue what this is all about. So I make the team. We're on it. We're on a JV team that is undefeated, untied, and unscored upon. We played 10 games and nobody scored a point on us. Wow. And that team then went on to do that 3 years of varsity state championships. So we were at a good time. It was a good time to do it. But I had to stay in disguise because the injury thing, the fear of that, and that extracurricular, I was already biding my time playing one sport. There was no chance I was going to play football. So my sister knew about it. My mother didn't. My father didn't. I could keep it under wraps because we didn't have a newspaper subscription. Nobody cared about sports in my household. So I could stay undercover. And I just told a white lie of, I've got study hall. I got to go to the library today. Right. I did anything I could. And my buddies' moms washed my practice gear, washed my game uniforms.
That's great.
When the scholarship offers started coming in, my cover story was all they had was logos for the address and the university name. Didn't say football program, didn't say, it just, and they knew that I was a good student. So I just said, these are scholarship offers, Mom and Dad. You won't have to pay much to send me to school. And they just said, you just keep that. That's all yours. So they would just stack my mail. And
so did they ever eventually see you play, or how did your parents finally find out that you were actually this great high school football player?
Senior year, my dad, who was a contractor, was pouring concrete for a customer. And the guy, they were settling up, giving over the invoice, and my dad was ready to do the payment deal and receive the money. And he looks at he comes out and he says to the guy, we're all set to go. And he said, there's something puzzling me. He said, I've got an article in here that front page. It's got a kid named Gatewood. Do you know this? And he's got your same name. Is he related to you? I said, football? No, my son doesn't play football.
Wow.
He goes in, gets the article, shows him. There's my mug, and he goes, oh, I had no idea, and neither did my mother. And then we had a big discussion. I had to go dig up the envelopes and say, here's the content of those envelopes. It's football offers, but it'll cost you nothing. I can go for free. So then they were on the road with me to go to Penn State, go on the road to go to different schools, go to Yale, see different schools who were offering me scholarships to try to help me make a decision. But it was tough for them to help me do that because they didn't have any experience with college and certainly not football. So
Sure.
I relied heavily on George Young to be my mentor.
Okay.
Because George was the one who put together a highlight film and sent it to Parseghian.
Even back then,
they had not recruited me. I was almost set to sign up, but not Notre Dame. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know they were in Indiana. I had never seen them play. This is coming right off the championship. 66 was the championship team.
Right.
67, 68 my senior year.
Sure.
I didn't watch that game. I didn't know about Notre Dame. I didn't really still, after playing on those championship teams, still really wasn't that much, into football, but I was on the road, seeing Syracuse, seeing all the schools, any schools that were close enough for them to drive because they had never been on a plane before. They were happy to go and take in the social aspect of recruiting because the X's and O's, they don't know anything about it.
Right.
They got a good quarterback, they got a great middle linebacker. That was like Greek to them. So
right.
So that was when they found out, and that was when I came clean, and the pressure was off me, and I had my February meeting in South Bend. That was going into my senior year.
Wow. Okay, so it's your senior year now, and you have to make a decision. And you mentioned before that Notre Dame really wasn't recruiting you at one point, so they weren't one of the hundreds of letters that you got. I mean, who were the final schools that you wound up taking a visit to, and then eventually kind of going with Notre Dame?
I think the top school that I was concentrating on, because it was not too far from home, but was making its mark, was Paterno and the Nittany Lions at Penn State.
Really?
And there were some of my teammates in baseball had gone to Penn State, and they were pushing me pretty hard. So that was one place I was taking a look at. My first trip was to UCLA.
Nice.
And then I came home, and then I flew back out and went out to see USC. And O.J. Simpson is my host on campus.
Wow.
So back-to-back California trips. And then I didn't get recruited by Notre Dame until February of my senior year. And then you had till May to sign your letter.
Right.
So it was a whole different structure then. So you had plenty of time left. But they had really showed no interest. And their explanation was that I had just fallen through the cracks. The other part is, nowadays with the recruiting, as you all know, you can find highlights of the second string guy at Carson High School in Reno, Nevada, if you want to.
Right.
There was no way to scout except a guy going and sitting in a stand and watching you play, or if somebody put together a highlight reel, because there was not this YouTube kind of, mechanical technology set up to recruit. So, and being in the Maryland corridor, Maryland football really wasn't on target that much anyway. So I fell through the cracks, but Coach Parseghian was the difference. And because
did you wind up taking a visit there, or
I took a visit in February?
Okay.
In a 9-inch snowstorm.
I was going to say, because it seems like every time there's a recruiting season at Notre Dame, it snows. Man, I've talked to guys before, and their stories are, I went to Alabama, I went to Miami, I went to UCLA. I go to South Bend, it's snowing. I'm like, you still went to Notre Dame.
Exactly. So, Coach Parseghian's office was in the Rockney building, in the basement. in the basement of the Rockne Building, that one of the most prestigious programs in the country and one of the all-time great coaches, and would later become a college football Hall of Fame coach and so forth and so on. He's in this humble little office down in the Rockne Building.
God.
And I said, okay. So that wasn't very impressive. I mean, compared to some of the other schools and some of the other facilities that there were, it didn't stack up to this legendary program. But nonetheless, his command was what struck me. His eyes. He had the eyes, as you well know. I mean, you know, I'm sure you've sat down with him at some point. Those dark eyes, and you could just see he was a powerful guy and sitting in a powerful position. Yet he was very humble. And with me, he said pretty much, which was the sales closed for me, was, we've seen your film, we've looked at transcripts, we've spent a lot of time talking to your counselors, finding out about your character, because those are elements that are very, very important. If you can come to us with that already in place, it's just a matter of developing your talent, your skills. If we can do that, if you can wait it out and be patient, if you can make a contribution to this university, it'll pay you dividends, and you'll know you'll be set for the rest of your life. He said, you know, you've got to put in the work. Everybody else basically was saying, you're shoo-in to be an All-American. We're going to change that.
Wow.
Paterno was talking about changing their offense, more passing. Woody Hayes at Ohio State was just handing balls off, hand it off, hand it off, hand it off. All of a sudden, they were going to just have this great passing attack because you're coming in. So for me, Schembechler, same thing. And the Big Ten was basically throw. And said, wow. But Parseghian said, I think you can help us out. You can help us out. You're part of that missing piece that we could develop. But again, you're going to have to put in the work. Basically implying and letting me know that having talent is enough.
Right.
They're looking for people with character, people who are dependable and basically going to perform. I hadn't heard those words enough. And when I heard them from him, all of a sudden, I put a hold on all calls. I was like, I had to wait and see what I was going to do. And then when I conferred back with George Young, we basically talked over everything. We talked about, the Catholic. I was a Methodist. It's a Catholic school. Does that matter to you? Not really. That spirit is what matters to me. And if there's spirit, I'm safe, and I can build on that. He said it's like 8, 9, 10,000 people. It's a small school. Does that fit your psyche? And I said, that's great. I mean, the other schools I'm talking to are 30,000, 40,000, large schools. Maybe a small environment is the right way to go. He was the perfect counselor. He wasn't dictating. He was listening, feeling me out. And then, I made a decision, and that was it.
Well, it's great that you had him in your life because, as you mentioned, I mean, this was kind of far from anything that anyone in your family had ever experienced. And so having a high school coach that was able to kind of talk you through it, assist you with the information that you're able to collect from all schools and kind of help you evaluate, I mean, that has to be, you have to be indebted to that experience, because if not, you may, and since he sent in the film, I may be trying to talk to you, and you may be a Penn State grad,
Yeah, that's true. So, I would have been there at the same time as Franco Harris. So
there you go, bingo.
That would have been a pretty good combo. Him taking handoffs and me catching balls, if that was the case. But,
absolutely.
But so, Parseghian made it very clear that part of the Notre Dame program and part of the package included exposure, national exposure.
Okay. 300
radio stations across the nation, replays on Sunday, one minimal, 2 most likely nationally televised football games to have your name, your football, your playing all across the country. He said, if you look at the regional schools that are out there, whether it's a California school, whether it's the Big Ten, or whether it's in the Southeast, wherever it is, you're talking about conferences. You're talking about being in a small geographic area. But at Notre Dame, when you hear that name, that's a national brand. And for me, it was like, wow, this was going to satisfy my dream, because at the time, historically, this is 1967, 68. The world is in a turmoil. The country is exploding. There's riots in the city. The minorities are disenfranchised in America. And in many instances, they still are disenfranchised today. Sure. All these years later, it's still the case where it's not a level playing field. That was the climate. Kennedy is dead in 63. Martin Luther King in 68 assassinated. Bobby Kennedy running for president, trying to get through the primaries, is mortally, struck down in 1968. The world is exploding, falling apart. The democracy, the system, where are we going? National Guard are coming into Baltimore from Alabama. They brought all the way to Alabama to bring the National Guard to Baltimore to control, people, rioting and looting and getting things under control.
I mean, you're an 18-year-old kid, and you're about to make this venture to South Bend, this national school, Notre Dame. Yet back home, your freshman year, it's the same year that Dr. King was assassinated.
Right.
And you have all this. I mean, what are you thinking? Do I want to leave? What's going to happen? How do I make my mark? What's going on? I mean, what's going through your mind at that time?
I'm thinking that I want to make a contribution. I want to be a part of the movement that expresses the concern of people of color. I think I'm at the perfect place, because I'm in a place where whatever you say is going to be picked up by the Chicago, Sun-Times, or it's going to be picked up by the New York Times or the LA Times, so forth and so on. You're going to get media coverage, just because people are going to want to know, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? And yeah, you can talk about the touchdown you scored, but you can also talk about things that are also crossing your mind that are maybe detrimental to the smooth passage of being a student, just being a college student.
Sure.
It's tough enough being an athlete and getting the whole package, because you spend so much time conditioning, so much time in meetings, so much time away from what the normal student is doing. Fortunately, at the time, we were able to, because the student part of the student athlete title was balanced. Mm-hmm. I never felt shortchanged that I couldn't get that education that was promised. I was promised, you play football for us, you'll have the opportunity to have a degree. And that was the contract. And that never wavered. I never felt like I was getting shortchanged there. Now I could have, dragged my heels and, not really gone with that. But I wanted it. I wanted that for my mother. I wanted that for my family. I was interested in having that moniker of the first. And wow. there wasn't enough the first. That's all you basically heard in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Oh, the first, my quarterback in high school was Kurt Schmoke, who was the first African-American to become mayor of Baltimore.
Wow.
I played basketball with Leonard Ham in high school, who became the first police chief in Baltimore. I mean, Baltimore was basically a segregated, a quiet segregation.
Okay.
It was so if you looked at all the power brokers before, as I was growing up, there were no African Americans. So there was none to say I was the first, or I was the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. You didn't have anyone to look to. So I wanted to be a face for some African American kid who's 10, 11, 12, 14, 15 to see me catching balls in the Cotton Bowl, see me catching balls in Yankee Stadium, seeing me in the LA Coliseum playing against Southern Cal, playing in Miami, playing in New Orleans, playing in, and all those things about me saying, well, that's recruiting. Well, that's reality. The reality was
Right.
we were, traveling around the country. So my brand, my face, my ethnicity, my pride was on display on a national platform, basically saying, see me, be me.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, here's my sign. Football matters. Yeah, it matters to me to be a representative of the game of college football because it was the first level playing field that I was able to play and perform on, where my teammates respected my talent, but more than my talent, my performance. I was clutch. I was a third down receiver. When all the chips were on the line, the guy that Theismann was looking to was number 44. And so to be dependable and to have those kind of traits was out there, and it was out there, and it was out there. So that's like being a freedom rider. I mean, there were people who getting on buses going to Birmingham. There were walks. Even Hesburgh walked with Martin Luther King in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
My uncle, Clifton, who was a minister in Harlem, New York, he was the first Gatewood of his generation to have a degree in divinity school. So I was just carrying a torch, but I wasn't burning down buildings. I was carrying a torch for freedom and the fact that God gives us all talent. We all have talents. Sometimes it takes longer to find it for others than others. But once you discover it and you let it shine, it's a great feeling. So Notre Dame was a good place for me because of that spiritual aspect. That was a big part of my upbringing.
So when you're a freshman and you have this stuff going on back home, you come to Notre Dame, all male. What was that adjustment like? Now, at the time, freshmen were not allowed to play, so you kind of knew that coming in. So you had a chance to kind of adjust. What was that adjustment period for you? And I'm assuming there weren't a lot of black students at Notre Dame at that time.
There were less than 1% of the total enrollment was African American.
Wow.
So if you look at the number of athletes between basketball, football, and whatever other sports or whatever, if you deduct them from that less than 1%, I mean that really drops down really quickly because however, there was change going on. Things were happening. The first African American president of the student body, Dave Krashna, was elected during the time I was here.
Wow.
So that was groundbreaking. But then it's almost 50 years later until Corey Robinson becomes the second African American. So that was groundbreaking in the late 60s, but no more ground was broken for a long time. So I don't know what happened to the perpetual, motion there, but nonetheless, that happened. I became the first African American captain. That was a groundbreaker. Austin Carr in basketball the year before was captain of the basketball team. They had a great run and had some great African American players at the time. So it eventually evolved to the point where you look at the guys on the field and the guys on the sidelines now is very comparable to the top programs in the country, whether that's Clemson, whether it's Ohio State, whether it's Alabama, whether it's Florida, whether it's, you go down the line, the percentage of African Americans who are represented on football teams, at least, are almost in the majority across the country.
Right.
But not sure what that reflects in terms of overall enrollment in the university. I don't know if those numbers, I don't think they exploded the same way that the athletic usage of the players were. But I know that there's more African Americans on the football teams and the basketball teams here. And the student body in general is certainly more than less than 1% that it was when I was here. So there has been progress and things have changed. And I think a lot had to do with Hesburgh being here. And Father Hesburgh served on the Civil Rights Commission in Washington. And he was very enlightened and very much ahead of his time. So I think he realized that it was time to make this move, and so things did change.
Well, I want to get to that as well, kind of your relationship with Father Hesburgh, but so freshman year you're able to adjust, not playing. Second year, your sophomore year, you are playing. You have some success during the year, but I don't know. I read about a conversation that you and Father Hesburgh had. Can you share with us what that conversation was about?
First of all, I was asked to come to his office. First of all, when the president of the university asked me to come,
not even the coach, but the president.
Yeah, it's like I skipped by all those other people. And, somehow it was I was asked to make an appearance, and it was a very interesting one because I had seen him before. He was on campus. He comes to the practices with other priests and so forth and so on. So it was a wide open thing. He was very concerned about how I was taking the political climate, the racial climate, the tension that was happening around the country. And he was interested to see how I was handling it and what my views of the campus at Notre Dame, what was the mood here? What was the emotion that was happening? What things could we do, Notre Dame do, to make things more comfortable? And I was surprised he was asking my opinion.
Sure.
But I guess my opinion is as good as anyone else's. But basically, my dog is popped up here. So,
awesome! What kind of dog you got?
He's a golden doodle. So
nice.
I'll just pop it in this.
Please do. Oh, nice.
It's Jackson here.
That is awesome. We have 2 rescued Rottweilers.
Oh, wow.
And I would show you them, but they'd run all over my office. So.
You got the big guys. So anyway, some of my situation was that I definitely thought that there should be increased student activity in terms of the African American community, because a big part of your college education is certainly cultural exchange.
Absolutely.
It's also the dynamic of there being women. There were none at the time while we were here. But I knew that condition coming in. I mean, and I went to high school, it was all male. So it wasn't that the educational environment, couldn't still flourish. However, it is part of your education. Social developing social skills and so forth and so on is a big deal. And he talked about that coeducation is definitely on the burner, and that may happen while I'm here, but it didn't. It happened the year after I left. But that was one part of it. But St. Mary's had a few African American students who were there, but it wasn't on the same level in terms of the number of guys who were here.
Right.
I also said that if there could be more encouragement of our involvement with off-campus families. I thought that if there was an African American family or two who were out there, and you could go make that your home, your second home away from home. And that did happen. That did happen during the course of time I was here, and I had great relationships with several families, white and black, and maintained those relationships throughout my adulthood into the present. So some of those kids, they grew up and they were just like my brothers and sisters, and they still are. And now they have grandkids and I have grandkids, and it's one big happy family. I talked about Black Studies programs, having more so we could be proud of our heritage, as opposed to the images that we were always seeing were all like we really made no contribution to this country, that we weren't a part of it. So I wanted to make that known, that I wanted that there. He cautioned me about some of the negatives I could face across the country representing the university, that there would be pressures that I would feel. He said, you're going to have to be the Jackie Robinson of Notre Dame for us. You're going to have I want to make sure you have the temperament to handle the pressure, because you're going to feel it. And
you're like 19 years old, and the president's talking.
Yeah, we're having some deep conversations here, because let's face it, when the football team recruits you, I don't think you have to be rubber stamped by the president of the university. He doesn't really know you until he gets to know you. And I was just a guy catching passes, and he could obviously see my transcript that I was an honor student, freshman year, sophomore year, junior. I mean, throughout my career, I just continued to do that. So he felt like, here's a good spokesperson. Here's a person who needs to be out there. Then you got Roger Baldessari, the sports information director, who's the premier information and communication guy. Spending time with him, understanding how to communicate, dealing with the TV camera, which is relatively new, because college football was pretty new in the 60s. I mean, ABC Sports was basically the maven and the lead communicator for college football. And it was really the 60s when they started. So Roone Arledge, a Notre Dame graduate, was the president of that outfit. So it was a medium that was exploding. Radio had been the king.
Right.
And TV was really on the run, really on the move. And Roger was great at being able to spend time with the athletes and teach us really how to manipulate that camera, how to use it, how to make love to that camera. It's like it's a friend of yours. So I loved it. And ultimately, I wound up with a career in communication, in television communication.
That's amazing.
I loved it so much.
It's interesting because that same kind of leadership that Roger showed with you during your time there, I was fortunate enough to spend time with him as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a unique experience for me because I didn't have a father growing up. And one of the craziest things I remember, and he would kind of just, and for those of you guys who don't know who Roger Baldessari is, he's like this 4'2" nothing Italian guy at Notre Dame, and he's been there for forever. And I mean, he had this special knack of kind of knowing what kids needed what at what time, because I'm down and out, and he puts his arm around me, around my waist, and he's like, "Chris, what's up? What's going on?" And so, that relationship extended to, and I'll never forget this. It's kind of weird, but he taught me how to tie a tie.
Yeah.
And it's just those things that I had never experienced or had a need basically to wear a tie before. But I wanted to mention his name as you did, because he was one of those unique individuals that allowed you kind of an opportunity to kind of be yourself. And in your case, when you combine Roger and Father Hesburgh, I mean, you had kind of the greatest mentors the school could offer.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is, again, education is not just limited to the classroom, and in today's parlance, with Zoom and all of that, being distance education, it's so hard to do that. But when you're in person and people are embracing you and touching you and making eye-to-eye contact, that's a real education that is unbelievable. And these two professionals, and then you add Parseghian to the mix, and you just, all around you, it's amazing. Roger wanted to share cultures. That's what was cool. Here's this Italian guy, and here's this African-American guy, and we're talking about, fried chicken and black-eyed peas and collard greens, and I'm saying, yeah, man, that's some soul food. I want to invite you over to see a really good friend, a family of mine. Paul Harvey is the guy, and at one point Harvey was the security guard for Holtz. He was recruiting the guy for a lot of the coaches who followed Parseghian, because he was captain of the South Bend Police Force.
Okay.
And so he was one of my mentors, one of the families that I hung out with. So Roger would come over and have dinner with us, and then Roger would invite me over, and I'm having pasta and Italian food and his culture. And we're talking ethics, we're talking politics, we're talking what's going on in the community. And so forth and so on. So he was learning as much about my culture as I was learning about his. And that was part
Wow.
of the exchange. And there was also the exchange back in the dorms with the rest of the student body, because one of the big pluses at Notre Dame was no athletic dorm.
Right.
So
Right.
your learning curve is being exposed even more, because you're sitting with kids whose parents are bankers, lawyers, counselors, business people, scientists. You can find out what's going on in their mind. What was that like compared to, well, my dad, I hardly saw him. He worked 6 days a week. He was a construction guy. He never got to serve in a union because unions were segregated and wouldn't let him join a union so he could have a higher pay. Um, he couldn't get a loan for this, but to expand his business because he was discriminated against and couldn't do, well, what was that like? Well, that was pretty tough. And so you're talking so that firsthand, you were educating them on maybe some things that they didn't really know about, that it was happening, but they didn't know about. So, it's not fun being turned down for a loan just because, and you're being denied going to stay in a hotel room, even though you're on one of the most powerful football teams in the country. But you're in Atlanta and you're ready to play against Georgia Tech, and somehow the hotel doesn't seem to have enough rooms for your team. And Coach Parseghian decides, well, I'd like to have an audience with the Atlanta Constitution. I'm sure that they might have an article or two that might be, some writer that might be interested in hearing that this city that calls itself the New South, if this is the New South, we're in trouble in America. And it's hard enough playing against, we're on national TV playing at night against, Georgia Tech. And the following year, it's interesting, a big turnaround comes. Ed McShann becomes the first African-American quarterback in the history of Georgia Tech. The year after this sort of discriminatory thing. And it's not saying that the team did,
Right.
but that certainly the hotel did. They had some problem that was somehow miraculously taken care of in time for us to check in. And so, I'm sitting there going, all we're trying to do is show that we can play the game on a national level. Myself, I scored a touchdown that night, and that silenced the crowd for a while. And then a couple of series later, Clarence Ellis, who becomes an All-America safety and plays for the Atlanta Falcons, ironically, gets drafted by Atlanta.
Wow.
He scored a 70-yard touchdown on an interception. So two African Americans on the Notre Dame squad, get things going, and Coke bottles are coming out of the stands, and all kinds of debris is being thrown out of the stands. That's how the fans reacted to what was going on, and that was one of the most demonstrative sort of overall. The whole weekend was kind of a bust. Fortunately, we came out with a win to kind of underline, it really comes down to performance. We performed, and we didn't pay any attention. We had closed ears to all the nasty, foul language coming out of the stands and on the field and any kind of things that were going on. We were able to overcome that.
That has to be in itself just very hard to deal with. But then you talk about, how many black players were there on the team, and when you came back from games like that, did you have to decompress? Did you cry on your pillow? Did you talk to someone or can't? What was it like kind of having to kind of come back and see that reality? Yeah, we won the game, but then you come back to school and there's only a handful of black students on campus.
Right.
Were there, did you have a chance to kind of decompress with fellow teammates or even students?
The cool part about it was that my teammates, white or black, coaching staff, we all bonded And Coach Parseghian made a comment in unison with the guys in the locker room, and during the course of the week as well. He said basically, we're a northern school, Yankees, if you will, traveling south. So it's going to be decided that it's the blue against the gray. I mean, that's one of the issues. We're Catholics going into the Bible Belt. There are people who don't like Catholics
Right.
that we're going to encounter. There are people who don't like the color of the skin of some of the players who are going to be featured in this ballpark. So there was a bond. We all had something at stake. It wasn't just the African American players who were under pressure. It was everybody on our team because we fit in one of those categories, no matter what the case may be. So he went out and he said, just go out there. If we can play together the way that God wants us all to be together, we can overcome this issue. So that's what we did. So that was a powerful speech from Coach Parseghian to go out there, and we needed that too because we're standing there. They didn't have a tone. There was a horseshoe design, and there was a big the building that we all came out of. It had locker rooms and stuff in it.
Okay.
And we were lined up on one side of the building, and Georgia Tech was on the other side of the building. And then we all rushed onto the field, and while we're standing there waiting for the cue from television to say, okay, you guys can go into the field, we're listening to all this really this racist stuff coming out of the stands. And that was our first experience, I believe. We were to travel to the South, in other situations, but that was the one that really stood out.
And in being kind of in that environment, I mean, I could imagine the brotherhood, the camaraderie, just even getting tighter because as you face adversity, normal adversity in a football game, football program, you bond, but then you add what's going on in the country at that time. These players seeing it firsthand. These white Catholic players saying, hey, you're my brother, as they're getting Coke bottles thrown at them. I mean, this is, or foul language. I mean, this is something that I can't imagine the strength that team had at the time.
I think it had character. It really did. There were guys from all over the country. Again, because it's Notre Dame, we not only play, as you know, at different places in the country, we also recruit players from high schools all around the country. We're not just Indiana. We're not just Ohio. We're not, it's all around the country. So you're bound to be enriched by that environment because people are different in different parts of the country. I mean, I'd never been surfing before, and I'm on the team with these California guys, and they're talking about surfing and what they do, and other guys some guys grew up on farms, and some fishermen. They had all these things that were going on in their lives, and it was part of the growth of culture. I mean, and I really absorbed it. I mean, I was really, because I was never just a jock. I mean, that was not what I was interested in. I knew that there would be life after football. Sure. You and me both. I mean, once you hang up the cleats, you got to still pay your bills. Somehow you got to get things done.
Right, exactly.
And so you're like reaching for whatever things that you got, whatever tools came along the way. Hopefully they prepared you for your next real adventure, which was living. And fortunately, I picked up enough tools to be able to make a living for the rest of my life. And now I'm living my life, sort of through our grandson, A.J. Dillon, who is playing for the Green Bay Packers,
right,
as a running back, and had a great career at Boston College, and went through the same recruiting process that I went through, and sure. I got to live through that, and getting an agent, and all those things. It's kind of fun. It's helped keep me young and helped me, stay with it. And when I look at the game and I talk to people, no matter who I talk to, this game is the same game that is played today. And people talk about, well, we've got this slot back. And I said, slot back? I said, look, we called it a wing.
Right,
and they called it a slot back. I said, but I was a wide receiver, but I wasn't just a wide receiver. I was a receiver. So Coach Parseghian was the master of getting a guy and saying, this is an athlete, and I can make him whatever I want to make him, and he can play wherever he can if he has the ability. So yeah, I'd wind up as a split end, or I'd wind up as a tight end, or I'd drop back and be in the wing position, and that's a slot today, or be out on the short side of the field. So, or I could line up in the backfield and go in motion and change position. So my nickname from Roger Valdesari, the master of sports information, was the Swinging Gate. That was my nickname.
What did they get that?
Because I was able to, the way that you can operate a gate can be closed, a gate can be open, it can be half open.
Right.
So I would line up in a position on the field that I was always the better athlete at that position. Right. So the deal is, if I draw man-to-man coverage and that man-to-man guy is usually a safety, and now he's in a position where a strong safety would be, or somebody else, or a linebacker, I got the advantage because I know what I need to do to get open. And he's uncomfortable. And my job is to make him uncomfortable. But isn't that life? If I can make you feel uncomfortable, I have you.
Right.
If I can shout out racial terms and get under your skin, then I've made you uncomfortable. I have you.
Right.
So that was another way of, learning how to overcome the issues of racism in athletics, racism in sports. Racism is everywhere.
Sure.
But so is love. And so it can be overcome. It can be overcome.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about your experiences. I mean, you made the Cotton Bowl Hall of Fame, and you had 2 amazing games there. But I came across a story on how kind of you guys were able to go to families where kind of families adopted you for a couple of days or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In the area. With us a little bit, because I think this is so interesting, and it kind of talks about, one, the unique nature of Notre Dame, but also, 2, kind of how the Notre Dame bonds kind of last for years.
Right. The bonding force was the Alumni Association that is across the country, where every city, small or big, is represented by and sustained by former Notre Dame graduates. And we got wind of it in the Dallas club. They wanted to have a raffle, and the raffle included the names of all the traveling squad who would be coming to Dallas. And this was a landmark trip because it was the first time in 45 years that Notre Dame had been to a bowl game. And during the course of my conversation with Father Hesburgh later, afterwards, was that all the financial proceeds that would be won by Notre Dame from that game would go to minority scholarships to increase African-American enrollment at Notre Dame, which was one of the things that we talked about during the course of the conversation. Subsequent years, as teams continued to go to bowl games, that scholarship program continued to be enriched. So that was a turning point in the makeup of Notre Dame. But going back to the Notre Dame Club of Dallas, they decided to have this raffle. And so my name, along with everybody else on the roster, was drawn out. And I had a family called the Ronan family, and they had 5 boys. So you got a stair step going from 3 years old up to 11 at that particular time. 5 boys. And we landed at Love Field instead of DFW. We was Love Field in Dallas. Late night, it was about 11 o'clock at night. And security was different in those days, so people could actually be at the gate.
Right.
As opposed to being locked in and waiting.
Right.
And here were these 5 boys wearing red pajamas. You know, those
my God.
long johns with
Yeah.
the button
Yeah.
up in the back
Oh, yeah.
seat of your pants.
All right.
They had slippers on. They had these red because it was Christmas time, so they had these red pajamas on, and they with their various little toys, their teddy bears or
Sure.
whatever their deal,
Sure.
and a big sign that said Gatewood. And every
Wow.
family had a sign as the players would come off, and they would find their adopted family, and you got to spend one night with the family of choice.
The whole a night. Wow.
Was
So it wasn't
really,
just like a meeting. It was like a
it
real
was,
wow.
They became they were the ambassador for the Dallas club, and that was how we were greeted. It was really touching, and it was really fun, and that was really cool.
Wow. Okay, so you've had a chance to experience a loss and a win in a time when Notre Dame had not gone to a bowl game, like you said, in 45 years. I mean, what has that done with, or what does it do to the program now that, I mean, you've won your first bowl game in 46 years?
Mm-hmm. I think it certainly was great for Notre Dame because one, it extends your season. You're not in a conference, you're an independent, so it gives you an opportunity really as a shot at a championship.
Mm-hmm.
For us to go back-to-back years playing against a team that was undefeated and basically carried the team from the year before into the second game.
Wow.
They were 20-0 in one season, and they were 30-0. They were be undefeated playing against the same head coach, who was also Darryl Royal, again, a college football Hall of Fame guy. Again, the part of the brotherhood that you and I are part of, and those are two people that who went head-to-head with each other. They had a great, great offense, and Coach Parseghian put together a defense that was called the Mirror, and basically assigned one guy to another guy on the other side of the field, and wherever that person went, the other person went. It was a very simple program. It was basically man-to-man coverage for 11 on 11.
Right.
And we were able to cause 5 turnovers by that wishbone offense that we recovered 3 of those 5 fumbles. And that's what had us in control of the game throughout the game. And it was, I won't call it a revenge game, but certainly you want to go back and do better.
Sure.
And we had come off that second game, we had come off of a disappointing loss to Southern California in the rain, and we lost our undefeated status. Therefore, almost is certain that you can't be a national champion and be a non-conference guy.
Right.
In that circumstance. But if you're playing against the number one team in the country and an undefeated team for 2 years, you feel like you've got, wow, if you can knock these guys off, you're really going to get some attention. And we fell just short of winning the national title, and Nebraska gets it with Johnny Rodgers as the Heisman Trophy winner and as the guy who's the big deal. They win the national title, and we just finished short. So I felt like we were one of the best Notre Dame teams not to have won a national championship.
Absolutely. And at that time, I mean, your quarterback was Joe Theismann.
Right.
And at one point, and I'm not sure which game, if it was the first game or the second game, but I mean, or I'm sorry, your sophomore or junior year, but I mean, you had so many yards. I'm sorry, you had so many receptions, and the next receiver had, I think, maybe 20 receptions or something like that, and you had like 70.
Yeah, I finished with 79 catches that year, and
so
I think I missed being the leading receiver in the country by 1 catch.
Oh my God!
And the leading receiver was from Davidson, and that's his yardage. I mean, my yardage was close to 1,200 yards. I think it was 1,200, something like that.
Okay.
His was like 500. I mean, he was catching a lot of. He was a tight end catching a lot of 3-yard pops. Here, there, the other.
Sure.
And but nonetheless, in those days, to have caught, whether he caught one more than I did or I won less than him or whatever, nobody was catching that many balls. And that was, again, another credit to Parseghian, who decided that this small, scrawny quarterback, number 7, Theismann, was going to have an arm strong enough He was an incredibly accurate, and he was a threat to run. So we had a lot of ways to hurt you, and so it was Coach Parseghian really coming up with a lot of smart, innovative things.
Well, now I'm going to talk a little bit about what Coach Parseghian meant to you beyond the field. The short time that I knew him, he was great.
Mm-hmm.
But as a person who recruited you to Notre Dame, spent your time with Notre Dame, and years after that, what does Ara Parseghian mean to you?
Coach I would say, he wasn't my dad. Not going to make him a dad figure because I had a dad. My dad believed in hard work.
Right.
He was always behind me, always in front of me. He taught me the values that I needed. For a guy with a fifth grade education, he was wise beyond his time and very, very quiet, extremely quiet. Me, you got to drag off the phone. You got to take the microphone away from me to shut me up. But he would not say a word. But when he did say them, they were powerful words. So he really took. Coach Parseghian was the first person that I met who had just great, great eye contact. I mean, I learned so much from his body language that it helped my observation skills, because I was told, and he told me, that observation is going to be the key. Your eyes need to see the same thing that Theismann sees. We spent hours in front of film, watching, teaching me that learning this position, the reason that you're going to know what Theismann is thinking and what is going on, because you're going to line up in every possible passing position on the field that you can legally be in.
Right.
You have to learn what the tight ends routes are, the X, the Y, slot, and running back. If you line up as a tailback, you have to be able to do that too, because this is the offense that we're designing. It's geared to make you successful in that no one person can cover you in any given game without feeling uncomfortable, because they're going to be in some place that they're not used to being on the field. I had to learn that philosophy and that technique in order to really understand the game. So therefore, I had some freedom. All of a sudden, I could run a route, the defense changes in front of me, and I can make an adjustment in stride.
Wow.
Without, and knowing that whether I'm the hot receiver on one, in one formation,
right.
But now I'm in a situation where I'm no longer the hot guy, but I might become the hot guy because the defense might change. So, we lived in the old days where, the play came in, somebody ran the play in, and you're taking a lot of time and you're doing whatever. It wasn't that quick glance and they're changing it from the sideline, and so now you're going, or you're listening to it in your earphone. None of that. The technology had nothing. No. It was slow-mo football, but it had to be an impact. So so he made it clear that you've got to be observant. You've got to keep your eyes open. And that works in business. It works in life. It works all across so if I took anything from Parseghian, it was the power of observation is incredible. Don't be afraid to look the guy in the eye and just make somebody feel uncomfortable. That's power. Make them feel uncomfortable.
You've had some amazing athletic experiences at Notre Dame, and one of the things I like to talk to guys who have gone there and played there, because playing there means so much. I like to kind of dive a little bit into kind of the non-athletic experience. Can you share with us kind of a memorable non-athletic experience that you've had during your 4 years at Notre Dame?
I think I had a roommate named Stephen Studer. He's an attorney here in South Bend.
Okay.
I only roomed with him 1 year. During the course of my senior year, I was named the first African-American captain of the football squad. For me, it was a powerful thing to happen because the lineup that we had at max, we had, I think, 10 or 11 African-Americans at the time on the team, maybe 12. My class came in with 5. The class after mine was 6. The class before mine was 3. The class before that was Alan Page.
Okay.
So it went from 1 to 3 to 5 to 6.
Right.
So it was growing that way. The team elected captains, not the coach.
Right.
So basically, if you count the walk-ons and the scholarship players and whatever on a squad, you got 75, 80 guys, whatever. And if you line them up and say, okay, African Americans, you're on this side of the wall, white players, you're on that side of the wall,
right.
Majority swing is not African American.
Right.
So if I'm voted and elected captain, the majority of those folks, regardless of their age, color, creed, religion, I swung the majority. So that was saying that they had high regard for my performance, not my skin color.
Sure.
So while that's amongst football players, it's got nothing to do with anything except a human impulse.
Right.
Back to Steve Studer.
Mm-hmm.
In being named and publicized as the first African American captain, a great deal of turmoil erupted, not from anywhere other than outside the Notre Dame community, because I received letters, phone calls. We're talking about hate because people were not happy about that transition. I couldn't take it after a certain amount of time. And in our time, there was no caller ID. So if your phone rang in your dorm,
right.
you either picked it up or you didn't pick it up.
Right.
And if I picked it up, there was enough that I just couldn't take it. I wanted to be able to go to class and relax. I wanted to be able to go to a football game and relax. So I made a deal with my roommate that he would become my security person. That he would open my mail because when you're getting mail, most of that mail consisted of fan letters and people wanting to sign cards but you would never know.
Right.
I really needed him to screen my mail. He screened my calls because sometimes it's my mother or my sister or somebody's calling and I want to talk to them, but I did not want to risk being upset. So he went through that for a year with me. And to this day, he laughs. I paid him $5 a week to do this. and he says, to this day, he said, I was really underpaid. I really know. He said, you could have at least given me laundry tickets, anything. You could have done anything. But
wow.
We have been friends from that day forward, all these years. The dog Jackson that I just showed you, my dog a bit ago, Jackson's brother lives in Mishawaka with Steve Studer and his wife.
Wow.
We came from the same litter. So we've been buddies and pals years and years and years. And it's amazing that that's the kind of, that memory lives today and lives on. And we tell that story about racism. Again, the racism was coming through an address on campus and a phone number on campus, but wasn't necessarily linked to the student body here.
Right.
A lot of this stuff was anonymous or it was just not fun.
Sure.
And he was able to help me get through that tough year.
Well, and this is and it's amazing because, so we're talking about 2021, which is going to be celebrated on the campus of Notre Dame as the 75th year of the Black student athlete at Notre Dame. in honor of Fraser Thompson, who was a track athlete and graduated like in the 40s or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, well, first, what's kind of, after hearing a story like that, I mean, when you think of 75 years of the Black student athlete, and you kind of gave a small example of Alan Page and how it increased small numbers each year, but when you think of 75 years of the Black student athlete at Notre Dame, what do you think of?
I guess I think that it was a landmark thing. It's something that you look back to. Your lineage has to begin somewhere. There has to be a starting point.
Correct.
So it forces you to reflect on the past. And I'm a big fan of history. I like to study history. I think we need that. The same reason that I think everybody's story should be told, particularly while they're still alive. My deal, I would love to sit, part of the reason, and while I'm here in South Bend, living here, I'd like to participate with the football program, to be a part of the ability to sit and tell a story, tell them about the history, a living history, right, that I'm still alive. So that if you have a question, you can actually ask. You can ask. Nobody can ask Fraser Thompson any longer, what did it feel like to be the first? I think that's a contribution that I'd like to share, and maybe Jack Warbrick would be happy to see something like that happen.
I actually just wrote that down because I think, Tom, I think that's an amazing kind of observation, because it's so funny, because being part of the history of Notre Dame, you hear about the Rockneys, you hear about the Gibbs, you hear about the Thom Gatewood, you hear about all these legends throughout the years, but you never hear from them, right? Yeah. I mean, you read about what they've done, what they've accomplished, but I mean, as I'm talking to you, I'm getting the hair on my arm is raised. I'm getting the chills, because the experiences that you faced, and I said this in the beginning, if not for you, me, my class, we would not have been able to accomplish what we did without individuals like yourself. And I think that the current team, and I think any team, should be able to find these living icons within their program to share these stories. Well, because these stories are, and you mentioned history, right? So if you don't acknowledge, if you don't learn from history, history will repeat itself. And so you're going to have individuals who may be going through a challenging time, not the same thing you faced, but a challenging time. And may feel that, well, I can't talk to my teammates because they'll think that I'm weak and everything else. So there's so many different opportunities out there for former players who are within that community to actually have a chance and spend some time with current players. And this, I'm not talking about Notre Dame, I'm talking about any school environment, because, when you talk about historic programs, you hear those historic names, but that's all they are, just names.
Sure. I mean, if you have an opportunity to talk to someone who has maybe gone through some depression because someone's called them some bad name, or they feel that they've done something that was successful, but in their eyes, this other person's eyes, well, that's nothing. You need perspective. If there's no perspective, we're humans. We don't live on, if your performance is this and the next guy does this, well, there's a variance between how well he did and how well you did. But it's also a context of the time in which you do this thing. So Chris Zorich making 3 sacks in a game or whatever, is that a big deal or is that not a big deal? And who was he playing against when he made these sacks? And, there's a story connected to it.
Right.
Me catching some passes and then Samardzija breaks my record, or Golden Tate breaks a record, or I laugh at those guys because I said this to not Samardzija but to Golden Tate. I reminded them that when I played, we played 3 years of varsity football, not 4. So that's 10 games times 3. That's 30 games versus 48.
Sure. Yep, exactly.
Then there was bowl games. Now let's add in 4 bowl games for you and 2 bowl games for me. So that's 32 games, versus 50.
Right.
So when you say you have this all-time record, you do have the all-time record. Absolutely. And to be compared with all the guys who had the same number of games.
Exactly.
But maybe I still hold all those records.
Right. The percentages. Right.
But, so no, but basically I'm saying historical spin. One of the things I regretted when I came to Notre Dame was when I got here, and you're freshmen, all you are basically being kicked around by the varsity because you are a scout team.
Correct.
For the varsity, and you're getting beat up. And then you get to go over and play and learn your plays so you can do whatever you're doing.
Right.
But on the fields over on the other side of the world, Terry Hanratty was throwing balls to Jim Seymour, and they had all these records and so forth and so on. And these guys are great players, and I never got to speak to either of those players.
Wow.
Now Theismann probably talked to them or whatever, but it would have been nice to sort of chat, because at the time in receiving, because it was changing, because Parseghian was here, Jack Snow and Hewitt and Seymour and Hanratty and Gatewood and Theismann, they were like back-to-back classes. One class beating the record set by the previous class.
Wow.
Right away. You know what I'm saying? So there was sort of a camaraderie that could have happened between the baddies of those teams. We could have sat down and talked, and that never happened. That never took place. It had nothing to do with color.
Oh, right.
Nothing to do with color, but it just. But we're all back to, again, the historical perspective of there was a need, and all around the country, teams were throwing the ball. I mean, it was an evolution to the game all around the country, not just at Notre Dame, but the fact that we were such a small university, and the varsity practiced and we practiced, and it was in the same building, but we were separate. It was like that freshman squad didn't exist or whatever. And I would have liked to have. And then later on, in some fantasy camp settings and some trading card segments, I wound up meeting Jim Seymour and chatting and talking, and it was fun. And I met Terry Hanratty when I was in New York. He was in New York. He was a stockbroker. I was a businessman, and we got to meet each other on a social basis.
Sure.
But it would have been a lot more fun way back in that context.
Exactly.
But anyway, so that's it was just different. It was just different.
Well, and this is kind of, we're going to kind of wind down a little bit, but when we talk about this game of football, you mentioned before you loved the game of baseball. You're now on the board of the National Football Foundation, and that oversees the College Football Hall of Fame, but there's also other initiatives that really kind of, in the last several years, the game of football has been under attack, right? I mean, you've when you look at the percentages, parents are keeping their kids out of the game of football in huge amounts. But what the National Football Foundation and the organization, they want folks to understand that football does matter. And so, can you share a little bit with us about what Steve Ashel, who is the president of the National Football Foundation, what you guys are doing in order to kind of keep um, this game of football alive? Because I obviously a little partial, but I think it's the best game in the world because within seconds you can get beat on a play, and that instantly has to be erased from your mind because you have a next play 7 seconds later.
Mm-hmm.
And having to face adversity and having to overcome that within 7 seconds and play another play is an amazing feat to be able to accomplish. But can you please share with us why football matters, but more importantly, what football means to you, Thom?
I think to sort of sum it up, we are ambassadors. You and I, and we represent the best. But there's a supporting crew who made us the best, who helped us get to that point where you became stars, but there were other people doing a lot of pushing and shoving and tackling and sweating and cheering and whatever that were part of the equation. And that's called team. That's teamwork. This is the greatest team sport on the planet when you're trying to coordinate the movements of the 11 guys on your side,
right,
and manipulate the movements of the 11 guys on across from you. That's 22 people. That's an amazing thing. I mean, that's a big dance. I mean, that is a big choreography. That's almost impossible to even think of. And that every play is really designed to either score the touchdown or stop the touchdown.
Right, right.
So you have these opposing forces, and that makes for a great TV or a movie, or I mean, you're talking about depth.
Right.
But in many instances, we're trying to impress upon the value of sport, of football in particular, in that it is a character builder. It is a lifesaver. It is a method by which the underserved, the underprivileged, the people who financially could not, in fact, enjoy the quality of life or an education the way that football can reward. And so I think I probably could have received a college education somehow, some way, because I think I had the intellect to do that. But I wouldn't have had 100% choice. I had the option to go anywhere. You had an opportunity because of what you did in high school to go where you wanted to go versus someone dictating this is your path to life. I think it's an opportunity for inclusion, specifically for sure for minorities, but it's not just minorities. It's not just minorities because it's about economy. It's about money. So whether you're white and coming from a lower middle class family or middle class family, and it doesn't even have to be that. You can be from any class of family because everybody's circumstance is different. I don't know what the financial needs of your parents were, my parents, my teammates' parents. I don't know any of that stuff, and it's not my business. But here's a chance for an opportunity to get an education and get past or get into whatever it is you want later, because later is what carries you for the rest of your life. 4 years on the football field at college, and it's over. Leave it all behind, leave all the memories, all that stuff behind. Everything else is in front of you. It's time to raise a family. It's time to, extend your education, so forth and so on. So Steve Hatchell, Archie Manning, the board, former players on that board are people like Lynn Swan and Ronnie Lott and myself. Archie Griffin. I mean, you just go on. And the game of football is safer today than it ever has been in the history of the game. And that's because of very, very specific actions The NFF has gone to Congress, has gone up the ladder to have meetings with congressmen who actually played the game. They have an understanding of its value. Part of what they learned on the field got them their positions in the Senate or in Congress, so forth and so on. There are presidents who have played football. There's people from all walks of life who played football, or it's touched their lives. They had a son or a daughter, or a grandson, or so forth and so on, who's played the game. We are ambassadors in that football matters. Black lives matter. White lives matter. Asian lives matter. All kinds of things, fall in that category of matters, because it comes to really the whole brotherhood of man and woman on the planet. Because it's moms who are concerned. My mom was concerned. But once she saw the fruits that were to be born as a result of me playing,
right,
she understood. I'm a proponent of the game. I have a grandson who plays the game today. He's played in a safer game than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
The chances are less for him to be injured, but it's not that he can't be.
Right.
But you can be injured on the line at General Motors. You can be injured in all kinds of scenarios that don't have to do with putting on a helmet. But to take it away, if that game totally went away, there would be millions affected. And I'm talking about millions of people, not dollars.
Right, exactly.
I don't want to put a price on that. But again, so for me, my opportunity to make a contribution and to serve on the board and to bring that message at any time that I get to speak or see or touch anyone, I'm always for sure talking about the character building and the life after football that does exist as a result of playing the game.
That's terrific. I got one more last question, and I want to ask you this because I always find this very insightful. But what would you tell a 18-year-old Thom Gatewood as he's walking in the steps as a freshman at Notre Dame through all the things you've learned over the years? What would you tell him?
Probably to follow your heart. I think if you do that, love enters the equation at some point. I think if you're making a loving decision, it's always a good decision.
That's awesome. Thom, this has been great, man. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you taking out the time, but more importantly, sharing these stories that I've never heard, but I think are so instrumental in obviously people's lives now, but also selfishly for our Notre Dame family, to allow them to kind of hear what you had to go through, but also what you've accomplished as a young man growing up in Baltimore, being able to experience what you've experienced, but having the type of success that you had considering the time frame we're talking about and how easy it could have been for any person, white or black, to not have the type of career that you had at Notre Dame, but have the ability to prosper and be so successful. So thank you for, I'm going to say this once again, thank you for doing what you've accomplished at Notre Dame, because if not for you, I would not have been able to accomplish what me and my teammates were able to accomplish while we were at Notre Dame. So I want to thank you for myself and also for all of my teammates for making the impact you had in Notre Dame.
No, I really appreciate the invitation to come and be a part of this platform and to discover an interesting fact. You're the easiest defensive player I've ever had the opportunity to talk to and actually help pull things out of me. I mean, you really made me feel comfortable and at ease. Usually it's a whole different story lining up against a defender.
That's great, man. That's great. Well,
so thank you for drawing me out.
Anytime, and I think a lot of it helps that we shared that same experience, right? We sweated on the same fields together, and I think that's the bond that I think we have, and that every player who had a chance to play at Notre Dame has with a former player, let it be 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, there's that special automatic bond that you have. But
right.
Also, being able to tell your story and the significance of what you had to go through so people like myself could have success. I don't know if I was in those circumstances that you were in, I'm not sure how I would have reacted. So thank you again for being that torchbearer for individuals like myself and the people that came before you. So again, thank you.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you again and learning more about your story. I mean, we can
absolutely.
We've talked about me, so you owe me a few hours to just sort of sit down, have a drink, and let's talk about what made you.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
All right,
Thom, this is awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yes, sir.